Ward by James Holland. The ward doesn't exist. It can't be seen from the outside, and the outside can't be seen from inside of it, except by vague intimations, a newspaper, a hope, a wish, even a dream. On the day I arrived, I was told it was a place of truth. What's contained is truth. The ward. Norman laughs, and he laughs, and he laughs. He quotes poetry too. Behind his blazing blue eyes, there exist flavors of mania that shine brighter than the oddly fluorescent hue of his irises. I told him to shut up once. He went about his business for some time, until one day the opportunity arose to take retributive action. I was left sorely embarrassed, but he did teach me a valuable lesson. Always get someone back one harder. It's quite the opposite of turning the other cheek, but despite the presence of clergymen, this was not a place of salvation, at least not any sort of salvation people hope for. Paradoxically, yet inevitably, psychiatric wards are a breeding ground for madness. It's a veritable face-off between competing psychoses, delusions, and complexes. One patient believes he is Christ, another Elvis, and some doctors believe they are Freud. There are no ducks in the ward, but there are a lot of quacks. They analyse you with beady eyes behind round-framed glasses. One wore the same two suits on rotation. Both stank of mould. The only connection to the outside was the paper. The hospital was kind enough to leave us one copy of the daily newspaper, but there's a pecking order in the ward, so when I received the paper, all the puzzles were done and the pictures scribbled on. The doctors had astutely observed that the content of some articles caused stress on the ward. They would, being the geniuses they were, cut out inflammatory, depressing, exciting, and troubling articles. The next day after this brilliant theory was put into practice, I received a shredded mess. Only the obituaries were left, so I diligently read them all, and did indeed experience envy. Around this time, I began to keep a diary with the school copybook. I, of course, had no idea what date it was, but it served as companionship. I would hide it somewhere for future patients to find long after I'm dead. Maybe it was months, or maybe it was years, because they had removed all dates from the newspaper, but one day I realized I was never leaving the ward. This should have been obvious, as I had never seen anyone actually leave the ward, except to go to the dreaded padded cells. I feared them more than anything. People would come out of the cells changed, different in a way that is hard to describe but intuitively understood. Everyone has their time, said Norman. I inquired him about this strange esoteric statement. When the cells want you, they get you. I felt a cold sweat break across my forehead. He continued. Man spent his life running from his demons, but they always catch him. It's a metaphysical law. He dampens his dry lips with his tongue, and those demons are in there in that cell with whoever occupies it. Can't be avoided, can't run from yourself. It's a metaphysical law. I decided I'd had enough and left abruptly. One young woman, Deirdre, actually finished a stint in the cells the next day. She was flocked in the empty TV room, the TV itself long gone. They gathered round her like pigs to the trough. I remained on the sideline, stalking the scene like a wolf, as if she had some sort of transmissible disease, as deadly to the mind and soul as Ebola is to the body. From what I could gather, she was withdrawn and unwilling to disclose her experience in the cells. I was lounging in the TV area later that day, after one of the intermittent blood tests they conducted on those of us who took clozapine, a powerful antipsychotic, when I was approached by Deirdre. She wore a lopsided grin and her brown eyes looked reddened from weeping. It wants you, she said. It knows you. I blinked and stared at her without saying a word. She sniffed. It told me about you. Oh, you must go. It wants to tell you something. Will you go? Before I could emit a single syllable, she went on. Because, well, it can see things, and it sees something in you. You really should go, I'm begging you. You want the truth, don't you? The cells. They reveal the truth to you. She shuffled away, her purple dressing gown trailing behind her. At night, nurses kept watch. They shine torches on you as you sleep to make sure you are sleeping, which of course wakes you up. A good night's sleep was impossible to attain without the aid of sleeping tablets, which I never took because they left you feeling hungover when you wake up, the opposite of what sleep is meant to do. That seems to be the guiding philosophy of the ward. Do the opposite of what helps. Your condition worsens, they take note. They decide you are not doing well enough to leave the ward. It's perhaps the most pernicious iteration of clinical psychology. The ward is a sanitized dungeon. No matter what I did, though, the cells were on my mind. They were like a ghost haunting the ward, unseen, omnipresent, ethereal. I imagined their cushioned walls, stained perhaps, imbued with terror. I was due an appointment with a doctor, Dr. Moriarty, a fat and smoked specimen. I still had no idea how long I'd been on the ward. It was an extended nightmare. The only thing separating me from the cells was the mood of a nurse on any given day. I had adopted a strategy of keeping a low profile. I argued with no one. I spoke only when necessary, and most of all, I minded my own business. The doctor brought this up in a meeting. It says here, the patient is unusually withdrawn and aloof. It's a flat affect and appears pensive most of the time. There's been a drastic deterioration in his condition from the time of his admittance to Ward B. I'm concerned. I'm upping your fluoxetine and clozapine. I'll check back in with you in a few months. Good day. The camel's back had broken. Each night I hid my meds under my tongue and stored them in a jacket pocket. I would save them for a month, feeling that would be an adequate dose to ensure my demise. It was one way out of the ward, perhaps the only way. Was I ever outside of the ward? Did something even exist beyond it? Could I have hallucinated my life before it? All I was sure of was that the cells were waiting for me if I should remain alive. The ward would deliver me to them. Across the sticks I would go. When the day arrived, I saved dozens of pills. Diazepam, clozapine, fluoxetine, aripiprazole, olanzapine. A cocktail if ever there was one. There was only one way to ingest them without intervention. In the bathroom with the shower running. Most residents of Ward B forego personal hygiene, whereas I showered daily, usually 30 minutes at a time because of my hypochondria. I would be sufficiently deceased by the time the alarm was raised. I felt no sentimentality as I shoveled the pills into my wash bag. I didn't even take one last look at the world I was leaving behind through the wire mesh window. I walked out of my shared room and saw Norman staring at me. He wore a discreet smile. It's a metaphysical law. You won't escape. He looked away briefly and continued. Returning were as tedious as go, or... To that I replied nothing and made my way to the metaphorical gas chamber and my de facto tomb. The door was locked. I knocked, but there was no answer. I couldn't hear any water running. I banged on the door, but still no one replied. A cough. I turned around, and standing there were two of the bigger male nurses and a doctor. The bigger of the nurses held up a key with his finger. The doctor spoke. This is a very unfortunate development. We thought you were beginning to make steady progress. Suicidal ideation is common here for some reason or another, but we have ways of keeping tabs on our patients. Your blood tests. They showed a steadily decreasing level of clozapine despite the fact your dose was increased. From there it was obvious what you were up to. We searched your quarters while you slept. We also found the copybook diary you kept hidden in the ceiling tiles. He held it up like a fish he had just caught. Makes for great reading. Sad, but good. It says here, T-4 weeks. The prick Dr. Moriarty has forced my hand. I will not suffer this place any longer than I must. Yada, yada, yada. This is all very worrying. I am sequestering you to the padded cells for your own safety. I hope you'll find reason in there. In fact, I'm sure you will. The nurses dragged me away. My body went limp. Adrenaline surged through my veins and I began to scream. Nothing could save me now. The cells had won. They'd caught me just as Norman said. The cell door was white. A nurse opened it. It was thick, half a foot thick at least. The ground was soft and the walls were cushioned. It was tiny and had a bucket in one corner and a mattress in the other. They brought me in and held me to the ground while someone injected a sedative into my buttocks. I made some remark about human rights, but they fell on deaf ears and the door slammed shut. There was a camera on the ceiling. I urinated in the bucket, soaked some of the toilet paper left beside it, and threw it at the camera. The overhead light flickered, and after an hour or two produced a hypnotic effect that numbed the intense tension being stuck in that cell created. To my surprise, nothing was happening. I don't know exactly what I had imagined happened in the cells. Something akin to divine judgment, maybe. But I heard no voices, felt no sensations, experienced nothing but the flickering lights. Were the cells a kind of myth of the ward? A proverbial Mount Olympus? But why did people come out of the cells changed? Was it an inner turmoil rather than a literal hell? A day passed. I didn't sleep well as the light remained constant through the night. I had befriended a little bottle fly that buzzed around the cell. I let him rest on my hand and scrutinized his anatomy. The hatch opened and an apple, a piece of toast, and a glass of water were placed in the cell. I drank the water and ate the toast. The apple I gave to my housemate. Days, perhaps weeks, went by and my routine of sleeping and talking to my bottle fly companion remained undisturbed, excluding the meal I received twice a day. I grew giddier as each hour passed. Unharmed, I let out a cathartic cry. I was sure I had bested the cells. I laughed, roared even. I was a master of my own fate. I am cured, I said loudly in the cell. You can open the door. Hell, you can discharge me. I'm cured. There was no answer, but I expected none. I stood up to bang on the door. It budged to my extreme surprise. I hesitated, placed my palm on it, pushed it, and it opened. Nobody was in the cell corridor. No noises could be heard either. Perplexed and frowning, I inched towards the entrance to the ward. Nobody. There was a TV there now. It was playing what looked like myself from the vantage point of the camera. It showed me lying on the floor, possibly dead. A fly scuttled across the camera lens. The ward seemed brighter, more fresh, clearer. It felt like I had awoken from a nightmare, or perhaps fallen into a pleasant dream. I went to the entrance of the ward. It too was unlocked. Delaying for a moment, I wondered if I had in fact died. But when I finally opened the door, a brilliant light flooded the ward, so bright it greatly obscured my vision. When my eyes adjusted, I saw it. The thing that chased me, or rather the thing that I chased. I stepped out and knew where I was.